Welcome to Transformational, the Teach Beyond podcast. I'm Keane.
And I'm Heather. We're here to explore what it means to be transformed in our own lives and how that overflows to living lives of transformational impact in our communities.
Today we have Brian Delamont, Teach Beyond Executive VP on the podcast.
And this is your final time joining us for this season, Brian. We're so glad to have you.
I am so glad to be here, and I'm so excited to be able to talk about leadership with you guys today.
Yes, we are ending this season diving into the core competencies of a leader. This is something we've been working on specifically to develop some anchors for leaders within our organization, but also that transcends just Teach Beyond. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right, Keane. In early 2023, we actually brought a group of our global leaders together for 3 days of conversations about leadership and what it looks like in very, very practical ways. And I was able to facilitate these conversations, which was so rich. And I love this topic. It's crucial for us to understand about leadership as we serve Jesus on mission. You both have leadership roles beyond your roles on this podcast, and you understand the power of good leadership as well as the challenges every leader and every team member faces when leadership struggles. John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on leadership.
That is quite a quote. It definitely reminds me of the reality that there is a lot of pressure and expectation, responsibility in being a leader. And also there's exciting opportunity for learning and growing, for developing other people, for making an impact. You're right that having a good leader is so important. And I think part of good leadership is recognizing both sides of that. That is, it's a responsibility not to take lightly, but also to see the potential when it is done well of the impact that not only you as a leader, but others on your team might have.
Yes, and I think there's something bigger and more powerful even than the influence of the leader. And that is, who is the leader following? Who's the leader following? So as a leader, when understood in a biblical worldview, I'm actually first a follower. I'm a disciple. I'm an apprentice of Jesus. And that's the foundation for leadership. And actually in Teach Beyond's mission statement, we say, as followers of Jesus, we are a global community providing transformational education services as part of God's ongoing mission to transform individuals and communities into all he intends. So what's the first thing in this mission statement? It's the answer to the question, who are you following? And where will this lead you as you are leading others? And that's why Teach Beyond starts with a statement, as followers of Jesus, because that's who we follow, even as we lead others.
I think that's really helpful as a way to start, is that we are also followers. Because I know lots of people don't feel totally comfortable with the label of leader. So how would you or Teach Beyond define who a leader is as we think through these core competencies?
When we first think about being a leader, we're not talking about like niche skills, like for this area of expertise or that particular area of knowledge. We're talking about who you and I are as humans, as leaders built upon the mission and vision of God for his kingdom to come and his will to be done. When we lead, we play an active role in that, partnering with God in his work. So a leader, like I've said, is first a follower, and then a leader is an influencer. And because of this fact of influence, more of us are leading than we realize. The people you're leading, your team, well, that may be your classroom. It may be other people in your working group at the office. It may be an actual sports team, or it could be your family or your small group.
I love that you're including so many different settings, different types of leadership. I'd venture to say that there's also a way of living life as a leader that we are leading ourselves and that we could lead up, as some people say, which is influencing those in leadership above us. So generally, leadership is less about having a certain title or position or role and more about how we approach what we're doing. And, Brian, I'm thinking of the statement that you often say that transformed leaders will lead others to the transformation that they themselves are experiencing. And I think a good leader is seeking to be transformed, that they're humble enough to acknowledge that being a leader doesn't mean they know it all. And yet they're being transformed in a way that will help them to lead others well. And in Teach Beyond, we use that phrase being models of a transformed life. And I love that phrase, but I think it's also important to note that models doesn't mean that we're perfect. Like, look at me because I know how to do this, but
Yeah.
models of being transformed means we're models of growth, of growing, of continuing to learn as leaders.
Yeah. So when we think about what leadership is, there are certain behaviors that are common to leaders. And of course, we know that behaviors are not the point, but behaviors are practices that help the leader live out their values. Our values inform our behaviors. And so, leadership without regular, actionable behaviors is actually going to create a confused, ineffective, and inconsistent team. And that's going to create tension. It's going to create poor outcomes and contradictions because leaders need to model what they want their team to be and become. Again, it's really a discipleship principle. So these behaviors are like all behaviors. It's not a linear series of actions that you try to accomplish in some sequential task, but rather they're competencies that can be applied to every situation that you or I or anyone is going to face as a leader.
Yeah. I love this framing of what we're talking about when we think about leaders, the different settings, the different roles, the different behaviors, opportunities. There's just so much to think about when we think about leadership and who leaders are. So, with all this in mind, we're going to spend some time talking about 5 specific elements or skills of leading well that have been identified as a framework for Teach Beyond Leadership. We're calling them 5 core competencies of leaders. So let's have a conversation about these. I'd imagine that our examples are going to be related to our leadership context. So Teach Beyond work, perhaps even outside of work. I know you guys have leadership roles as we've defined it in different settings.
Mhm.
But these could certainly be applied to all different types of settings, like we were talking about before.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So in Teach Beyond, we've identified 5 core competencies. And because we love education, they just happen to be anchored in A, B, C, D, E.
So good.
Yeah, I love it. It's so cool the way that all came together. And these may sound like common sense, but they help us keep in mind the behaviors that are central to leadership. And you'll notice that we don't actually have a specific Bible verse attached to each one of these because it all flows out of who we are as followers of Jesus. If we're being transformed by him, if we're choosing to intentionally follow Jesus and allow him to transform our hearts, then these behaviors flow out of that. They're not behaviors to learn, but they're happening as fruit when we are living and leading as God intends. Because good leadership always reflects God's good leadership and God's good design. So here they are. A is advance the mission. B, build teams. C, communicate. D, develop self and others. And E is evaluate. So let's start with the first one, advance the mission.
Mhm.
That's talking about how we move forward that thing that we are about specifically. What's our mission and vision, and how am I as a leader helping to advance that amongst my
Mm.
team? So we can do this through a number of ways. It's understanding more deeply the vision and values of the organization or the church or the team that I'm a part of. And then it's talking about that. It's
Mm.
articulating it and inspiring a clear vision. If you don't talk about it, people won't know. And we can all think of organizations that have lovely vision statements on the wall somewhere. But if it's not embodied, if it's not a part of your conversation, then your team's not able to really live that out. That shows up in our planning, in our execution, in our expectations of one another as a team. Yeah, things like that.
That's awesome. Brian, I want you to talk about vision casting here because I think it's central, like you said, talking about the mission, talking about what we're doing, helps get people on board. And I think there are different ways to do that, and different maybe personalities come into that, or different approaches depending on the nature of what the mission actually is. Because we're using that word kind of loosely here, right? It could be a family's values lived out,
Yeah,
or it
yeah,
could be,
exactly.
in so many different settings. So, what does it look like to cast vision well?
Yeah. Boy, that's a great question, and there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of books on that.
Sure.
But I think at its core, it's it's anchoring our our behavior in every way in what it is that we're called to be and become. And so a large part of vision casting, as we've talked about already, is how we live. It's the behaviors, these core competencies that we're living out. And when we think of advancing the mission, it's linking my tiny, tiny everyday actions and the actions of the team that I'm a part of or the team that I lead to accomplishing that vision, because
Mm,
it's always incremental. It's always the little yeses. It's 1,000 yeses that move you to seeing God do something absolutely amazing. It's this
mhm,
act of obedience in our own lives, but it's also an act of obedience corporately in an organization that's wanting to accomplish something together.
mhm,
So
mhm,
it's seeing, even an interaction between two people that you're leading, and then coming alongside of them and saying, you know what? The way you guys had that conversation embodied who we want to be as an organization. You had a difficult issue on the table and you addressed it and you moved forward together. And I just want to commend you for embodying our vision. It's sometimes catching people doing the right thing
mhm.
that really is a great way to vision cast forward. And then just talking about it, talking about it, talking about it.
Mm.
Yeah.
That conversation then reinforces what has already been talked about, that it can't just be all talk, it has to be practiced and lived out. But also there does need to be that identification of what we're aiming for in order for that conversation, the hey, you guys did a great job working that out conversation, to have any context, right? To
Yeah.
actually make sense. So I love that it's a combination of both front end, here's where we're going, here's what we're thinking about, here's what we're working toward, making that really clear, and then also coming alongside in a relational aspect.
And that's one of the wonderful things about advancing the mission is mission and vision will always take you into the unknown. Like that's where the creative edge shows up. That's where people get to be motivated and innovated and working in their areas of skill and gifting, uh, because you're going places and doing things that you haven't done before, and that's so powerful for a team.
Yeah, I love the idea of casting the vision and getting your team on board with it. And that way, then you can play with it. Then you can innovate, talk through new ideas, strategize, and everyone's kind of pointing in the same direction. And so it's such a helpful thing to have it as like a high priority of when new people join the team, you make sure they catch the vision, they can understand where you're trying to go, and then you are able to release them quicker, release them to kind of go in their own natural skills and use
Hmm.
those towards the same goal.
And I feel like the times that if I haven't articulated the vision well up front, sometimes I realize that I didn't do that in a moment when a new idea kind of goes a different direction. And it's like, that's a great idea, but that's actually not advancing the mission. So then we have that kind of highlights this is this has not been articulated well, and let's talk about it. And maybe depending on the size of the group or the nature of the leadership role, the direction actually does change, but there has to be clarity around, okay, this is the direction we're going now instead. But if it's no, we are going in this direction, especially in a bigger group, in a bigger setting where there are very clear articulated directional goals, then it's bringing that back in line with, okay, how does that then fit in towards that bigger goal?
Yeah. Yeah. I really resonate with what you're saying there, Heather. The opportunities within a team as we advance the mission, are really what can bring us together, in such a great way. And yet at the same time, knowing your mission is also a great sort of grid to filter ideas through. Like, does this help us advance the mission? It's a great idea, but does this actually help us accomplish the thing that we've all decided together? This is what we're about. This is what we're called to do. And it helps you understand how that goes.
I really love new ideas, innovation, creativity, and kind of pulling all those thoughts together to see where they can go. But I also know that everyone's different. We all bring different skills and backgrounds and kind of ways of thinking to the table. So I think for me, advancing the mission is identifying and looking at what different people bring to the table, and even creating a sense of psychological safety and trust on the team in order to allow for them to
Mhm.
engage with that vision and kind of build ownership in that too.
We want our team members to be equipped, empowered, and released to do the work that God calls them to do or be who they are. But we do that together. And that actually leads us to B, which is the building team piece. How do you build a team? Leadership is not a solo sport. If you're leading and nobody's following, you're just talking to yourself. So, building teams is another core competency for a leader. You have to be able to understand what it is to foster unity amongst your team members. How do you help them have those challenging conversations? Um, and there's where vision alignment feeds into this. If you're clear on advancing the mission, then building teams is so much easier because you've got people saying, this is why I get up in the morning. This is what matters to me. And so that fosters unity. And it also allows you to say in a safe space, I think you mentioned, that safe space, Heather, it allows you to create that safe space to bounce ideas around where everyone feels that they can engage, bringing who they are and what they have to the table. Collaboration. There's just nothing more wonderful than seeing a team come up with their own idea and run with it, and everybody owns the idea. So
Mhm.
this thing of collaboration internally, externally, in order to do that too, you've got to just be present. What other thoughts have you guys got on team building?
Yeah, team building is one of my favorite things, and I'm
Mm.
still struggling. This is a new problem, just the online workspace, and that you don't interact with coworkers outside of occasional online team meetings. But really, being able to build strong unity in a team and a lot of relationships can be built over time, and then you can pull on that as you do have conflict, as you do have kind of low level conflict of, hey, this isn't really the right way to go. I have a different idea.
Mhm.
But that there's trust there, that you are looking out for the best for them, for the organization, for the vision.
Mhm.
And then it's not a personal thing. It's you do like them, you do love them and care about them, but just this one idea wasn't quite right. With a strong team that feels unified and caring for each other, you're able to do that so much easier.
Yeah, I feel like building team has to involve interaction on the shared topic and outside of the shared topic. So, if that's my small group, we're there to study scripture together, but we're also talking about life and, maybe meeting practical needs outside of our group, or just going to fun events in the area together. So there's that way of building a sense of team, if you will,
Mhm.
and also we're studying scripture together. So it's not one or the other, it's kind of both enhancing the other, because then our discussion of scripture can be in the context of, where are you seeing that lived out? Oh, you had this situation happen at work, and so it's all interconnected. And then I think the same thing happens with our work teams, to know what's going on in their lives and what matters. How does what we're working on align with their own personal values and what they enjoy? So as you were saying, Kian, knowing people and building that trust then helps in the context of a working environment. When we're working on something together, it's like, oh, you're good at that. You used to have a role in this other part of your life. You can bring that perspective. So that not only helps the project move forward, but it builds that sense of being known, being valued, knowing how we can collaborate better. Because you can't just you know, hope to have unity and manage conflict and, hope people feel engaged and valued and hope that we collaborate well. All of that takes those intentional steps to ask questions, get to know people, and make sure that's, building something together.
Yeah, I love what both of you as leaders are seeing in this core competency of building team. the challenges of building a remote team, the time that it takes to get to know the people on your team. It's the long game. Building team is a long game. It's not, hey, let's go for ice cream or something when we're all together. I mean, that's nice and it does help,
You
but
know I'm all about going for ice cream when we're
I know.
together, Brian.
And those things are really important. And sometimes with our work hats on, depending on the type of personalities we have, some people are like, why are we going for ice cream? We've got work
Right,
to do. And
right.
other people are like, let's go for ice cream all the
Every
time.
time, yes.
Yeah, every time, all the time. We need to work with ice cream. Like there should be a bucket of ice cream close so we can get work done. But it's this wonderful and complex long game of building team because you you also have to know, I like to say that you actually have to know how to fight. Like you have
Mhm,
to know how to have genuine conflict on your team. Not
mhm,
just, well, that idea is not as good as the other idea, but
mm,
you have to actually be able to resolve disagreements
mhm,
and come out the other side of those disagreements. We talked about doing life together, and it's that same kind of thing that makes a team a team.
yeah,
So building team involves a lot of things, even that were part of that episode. So yeah,
that's great.
One thing related to this that I think I've learned as my team has grown internationally is
Mhm,
how much this is different based on culture. And
yeah,
the whole
hmm
idea of a meeting, like, hey, we have work to do, or hey, let's have ice cream and talk the whole time, is very culturally connected to who you're talking to and how.
totally.
So figuring out the balance between those things. And I think both sides have a lot to learn from each other. So
Mhm,
it's a good one.
yeah, that's a great point, Keane. Really great point. So then part of that is knowing how to communicate. And so key competency of a leader is communicate. Good communication, as we know from experts in the field, involves somebody who's sending a message and somebody who's receiving a message and what happens in that process, right? So as you're communicating with your team, to go back to your example, Kian, what context are they in? What language are they comfortable speaking in the case of our organization that works multilingually? Um, so you need to be able to effectively communicate internally to your team, but also a leader is very often speaking for that team in other places and spaces. So you need to also be able to be a good external communicator as you think of this core competency of communicate internally with your team, externally to the teams that your team interfaces with. You've got to be able to give culturally appropriate feedback. Um, in some cultures, you can go straight in and go, hey, let's look at this thing. Okay, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. We fix these three things and we can move forward. In some cultures, that is a very wonderful and efficient way to work. In other cultures, that is not the best way to come at the problem. And you need to find out what's working in the cultural context that you are. And I think finally, as a communicator, we have to be good listeners. You've got to be an active listener to be able to step in and know uh, really what is genuinely being said. There are the words that are being said, and then there's all the rest of what's being said. So yeah, parts of that.
Yeah, I love the part that you said that there is both the person who's speaking and then the listener. And it's so important. You can't say, hey, I had a team meeting and I shared these facts and now I'm done. Because if people in the meeting didn't hear them, didn't understand them, you didn't do your job.
Right.
You're kind of fully responsible for people actually understanding and not just delivering the message how you thought was right. And that's so true for all communication and as our director of communications, like making sure
Mhm,
graphics and everything actually communicate to somebody and not just I think they look good, but do
Yeah.
they actually communicate the message?
Keen, I love that you bring your director of communication lens to this. And and it's so multi-layered. And also knowing what avenue or what communication tool is most helpful in any given situation or to address that person
mhm,
who's the recipient, who's the partner in that conversation. So as we're communicating, like, will a text do? Okay, great. That may work for this form of communication out to your team. Maybe you need to, you know, create a 10-minute drop-in team meeting. That might be what you need to do. Or maybe you and your team need a couple of days away. Like it's determining which of these communication
Mm.
tools are going to get to the right place, the right way, the right time. Just like your graphic design piece. Is it telling the story that we really want it to tell in the best possible way? And that's where, again, the beauty of team is so rich, because everyone can bring their perspective to this conversation and actually enrich the communication and the power and clarity of the communication amongst that team so much, and actually really support the leader to live out this competency.
I like how you're talking about all the participants that are part of the team, not just the leader identified as the team leader. And I think about how it's important to remember that there are two sides when we're communicating, and that's what we're getting at here, that I can control what I'm doing and what I'm bringing in communication, and I can always be learning of how I can be clear or more culturally aware or whatever that looks like. But there's always going to be at least one other person on the other end, maybe many other people, and what they're sharing back, and making sure that I'm not just communicating well out, but also ready to receive communication back. And I think if a leader goes in just thinking, how can I say what I want to say? That's missing the point of receiving what the other person would have to say. And I think asking good questions helps us to then be set up for listening, because if you're just saying, then it's dependent on the other person having a response to, volley back and forth, comment, comment, comment. But if I'm asking a question, I am not only showing interest, but also looking for a response that will then help me to understand more about how they're seeing things. And that relates back to building team, B, and I think that
Mhm.
also relates ahead to D, developing others and self, because without communication and asking good questions and listening, we can't do those things.
Let's take a short break for a story from the field.
Hi, my name's Kayla Carson, and I lead the translation team at Teach Beyond Global. When my position was created, I was the only translator in the organization, and there wasn't a leadership aspect to my role. But the Lord blessed our team, because 3.5 years later, I have 16 workers and volunteers under me. I realized that I would need to step it up, so I began attending leadership trainings, and our team has seen major transformation since then. We're more connected to each other and unified in our vision to see Teach Beyond be as linguistically and culturally diverse as God intends, yet completely unified under the power of the gospel. The leadership courses also played a key role in our decision to purchase new software, allowing our team to take on bigger projects and increase our impact for Christ. God is transforming me into a confident servant leader when I wasn't one before. I've learned so much, and I'm so thankful that this transformation not only affects me, but also cascades down to our translation team and the ministries we work with.
For our weekly spotlight, we are focusing on Belize Christian Academy in Belmopan, Belize. To learn more, visit teachbeyond.org/go or click on the link in the show notes.
And now back to our conversation with Brian.
Yeah, yeah. So that moves us to D, and D is develop self and others. And so as a leader, we want to keep growing. And that, I think, in various seasons of leadership, this can be more or less of a challenge. Um, there are moments where, sort of early on, maybe in your career, you realize there's a bunch of stuff that I need to put tools in my toolbox for. And so you maybe, go get some more education, or you take some courses, or you do professional development in certain areas. But really, it is the responsibility of a leader to never stop growing, like never stop growing. And I think that ties right back to the thing we talked about at the very beginning of this episode, where it starts as followers of Jesus. Because as followers of Jesus, we want to never stop growing. We never arrive. We're never fully complete, because God always has more to do in us. And so as a leader leading under Christ's example, I am also always wanting to grow, and I'm always wanting to grow
Mhm.
my leadership skills and my team skills, and giving them opportunities to grow
Mhm.
and space to grow, which means mistakes have to be acceptable
Mhm.
in our leadership culture too.
Yeah.
And that's kind of interesting some days.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I love the concept of developing others and self because I always like to see how things can keep getting better, keep taking us somewhere new. But I think development also acknowledges that we're not there yet. And there's humility that I know I struggle with this to identify that we aren't there, to admit, okay, we have more growth to get where we're going. And I think as a leader, if we model, we're not there yet and we are on the journey and we're going there together and I'm here for you and I am also learning and growing, that creates that space that you're talking about, Brian, that allows for not only mistakes to be made, but also for just this growth mindset. And I
Hmm.
think back to season one, when we talked about growth mindset and the idea that I'm not there is kind of defeated, like, well, I'm not where I want to be, but growth mindset says I'm not there yet. And there's this
Yes,
continuum
yes.
where I can continue to grow. And the goal is not to reach the end and now we're finished growing, but that we're always growing and developing. And this is because we're always being transformed. And this is an ongoing process of the Lord at work in us and sanctification. It's not ever finished. So we can participate in developing ourselves and others by being open to what the Holy Spirit's doing and, modeling that we're all on this journey together.
Hmm.
I think it's so interesting as you talk about developing yourself and others is looking back and realize how much you have developed without realizing.
Hmm.
Looking back and saying like, wow, I've come a long ways from where I was 5 years ago,
That's cool.
and kind of being able to reflect on that and also reflect on that for your team of look at all the things you can do now that you might have not been as confident doing. And then I find this even comes into when new people join the team of you're not trying to replace this one staff member who's been there for 5 years, you're trying to replace who they were when they started. So you're
Huh.
not kind of putting those expectations of, hey, you should be 5 years in when you get started. You should be at zero and we'll grow together.
Mhm.
Um, as you look for new people, that's something that I remind myself of often.
Mhm.
Hmm. That's really, really good, Keane. Really good. And I'm going to jump into the next segment of our core competencies. The E core competency is evaluate. And you've just done that. You've said,
Mhm.
okay, I'm in a different place than I was 5 years ago,
Right.
and my team member is just starting. And so your standard of evaluation is different for them because of who they are and where they're at than it is for you because of the length of time that you've been doing the thing you're doing. And that evaluation process is so important for us as leaders. It helps us get out of the ruts that we're in. It helps us reflect back. We all do something that we feel matters. No matter who we are, no matter what we're doing, you go, I want this to matter. And in order to know if it's mattering, we have to evaluate. We have to take that step back and go, all right, let me reflect on what we intended to accomplish, advance the mission. Are we doing that? And what does it look like? What does excellence look like? It's one of our Teach Beyond core values: humility, excellence, love, and partnership. Well, what does excellence look like? It's not perfection. It's absolutely not perfection. But what does doing the very best look like in this context? And how do I reflect on myself? How do I reflect on the tasks or roles that I have? And so evaluation is a really important core competency for a leader, and one that sometimes is really challenging to lean into because it can be difficult. It can be awkward.
Yeah, I think, what Keane was talking about is that celebration of I'm not where I was 5 years ago, or wow, look at how far you've come. That takes reflection in order to be able to celebrate those milestones. And then also you're talking about, Brian, the things that we need to adjust or tweak and change that direction just a little bit in order to be able to aim more clearly towards advancing the mission. And I think about the importance of setting up rhythms for reflection. At least for me, I don't naturally stop to look back. I can easily even forget what we've done. So scheduling reflection actually on some sort of regular basis, whether it's quarterly, annually, actually helps to make sure that we don't miss those milestones. And then all of a sudden we're a few years in and we haven't taken time to
Great
evaluate.
idea. Yeah.
So I think just practically breaking it, I'm going to bring up the practical, like putting these things on our calendar can help us to remember that these are behaviors that we want to be exhibiting.
Yeah. Beautiful.
There's definitely something that I'm still working on in evaluating different things, but I do love at the end of a big project taking time to reflect back, celebrating that you did it, and reflecting on things that you could learn. Because throughout every big project, there are so many bumps we hit that we like,
Hmm.
oh, I wish we could have done this differently, right? If we had known that at the beginning, it would be better.
Yeah.
And so planning ahead for the next year, the next time it comes around, to be even more prepared.
Yes. I think about this in terms of, I think it's more obvious that we take time to debrief when there was a bigger thing. And I think about this saying, like, thank you, past Heather, for having actually taken the time to write down what you learned from that the next time this comes up, because then I can pull out notes and actually, know what past Heather
Hmm.
was thinking at that point in time. And I'm thinking probably more for recurring things that we know are going to happen again, and continuing to make improvements. But I think, in other settings, maybe this comes up even more, like in a family situation, or maybe it's back to a church small group or something. There's an informal, did that work or not? I think about, if small group attendees aren't coming every week, or if something didn't go well with planning a family trip or something like that. This seems maybe too formal to call that evaluation, but it's still making changes for next time.
Yeah.
Assessing, are we meeting the objectives here? Like, is this working for everyone? And that matters because we value the people around us, because we
Yeah.
care about people, and we care about aiming for the goal, because all of that, again, this is all flowing out of who we are as followers of Jesus. And so we care about people, and we care about continuing to advance the mission. So it doesn't have to be a big evaluate. It can just be a little, like, how can we make this better type of conversation too. And I think that's just as important.
Absolutely. Perfect.
Yeah, it's so helpful to work through all of these, the A, B, C, D, and E, and how these all work together as core competencies of a leader. There's a lot of leadership material that comes from a Western thought paradigm. How do you see these core competencies crossing culture and supporting leaders from all over?
We've actually heard from leaders in dozens of cultures where we're involved, and this does resonate in their context, and they're living out these core competencies, and they're very much in leading in this way. And that's so exciting because we want to keep learning from one another, recognizing that there isn't, one right way to lead, this Western way where most leadership books get written in, but rather to understand that different cultures embody and express leadership in different ways, but these core competencies really support and complement leadership in dozens and dozens of contexts. And that's really exciting to see.
Because we are followers of Jesus, right? And we know that that naturally transcends cultural boundaries, that Jesus calls
Yes.
people from every nation, tribe, and tongue to follow him. And so, of course, naturally, if this is flowing out of who we are as followers of Jesus, then it might look different. It should look different in different contexts, but it's going to be based around similar patterns and these behaviors that are flowing out of that.
Yeah, Heather, let me just tag on to that because I think we see such a great illustration of this in the early church,
Mm,
where they are actively taking the same essential message
mm.
and they are wrestling with the work of the Holy Spirit in their lives and with the cultures and contexts that they're in. You had rich, you had poor, you had slave, you had free, you had Greek, you had Jew, all of these differences
Mhm,
were brought together, and and God used his gifted, spirit-filled and empowered leaders
mhm.
to lead in all of these different situations. And I think that's something we can look at, if you just look at the epistles and the book of Acts with that lens on as you read these things. You learn amazing things. Not that we read the Bible as a leadership book, because it's
Right.
much more than that, but we do see the way God moves leaders into positions of influence
Mhm.
for his glory. And I think that's a really cool application of that.
Well, Brian, every month you leave us with a reflection question, and I am wondering where you're going to go with this because you have A, B, C, D, E, we have
Yeah.
cultures, we have so many different aspects. So, what do you want to leave us with this month?
I think, Heather, just to simplify it, at the very beginning of the podcast, we said that one of the most important things about a leader is who they are following. So leadership is the outcome of discipleship. And every leader is following something or someone. We are all disciples of something or someone. And so what we choose as leaders matters so much to who I am becoming and who my team are becoming as we do life together, as we follow Jesus together. So for the person listening to this, for all of us in the room right now, it's the challenge to apply maybe just one of these core competencies, given that headship of Christ as followers of Jesus. What does it look like for me intentionally for 5 minutes to advance the mission? What does that conversation look like? What does it look like to build team? What does it look like to communicate well? What does it look like to develop myself or develop someone else? What does it look like to evaluate for just 5 minutes? And one of the things that's beautiful about this is it brings an intentionality to it. And one of the ways we can foster that intentionality is with these little tools, little triggers that help remind us of this. And our communications team, Keane and his crew, have done a really cool job in developing a visual tool to help us do this. And I think we can share it with everyone listening. We've got it as a PDF that you can print, and we call it our Core Competencies Cube. You can download it. You can keep it on your desk or on your counter or in your classroom. I actually have mine right beside my computer monitor. And every day I just flip it over, and it reminds me to spend even just 5 minutes of that day leaning into intentionally doing that action as a leader. 5 minutes of building team, 5 minutes of communication, whatever it may be. These are things that are going to have a good outcomes for us. So the question I'd like to leave us with this week is, which core competency will you start with, and when will you do it?
I love it. The question is just make a plan. Use this tool. And we will add a link to that cube in the show notes today for anyone who wants it. Okay, Brian, as you know, every week on the show, we ask our guest, what's one thing that's changing your life right now? And this is a big week because it's your last time on the podcast for this season. So
Yeah.
no pressure, but we'll see what you want to share. What I'm sharing this week is having fresh vegetables and different things from a garden, and my kids helping pick them and cut them up. And they end up eating a lot more vegetables because they actually participated in their growth or in picking them or cutting them. We went to a local farm and we made salsa recently,
Oh,
and my
cool.
kids loved it, which I don't think they would normally like salsa, but because they helped to actually create it, they really enjoyed it.
That's so interesting. Well,
Love
we
it.
have a garden theme going here. I know we've shared about gardening on the podcast before, but this year I have added a little bit of a cut flower patch to my garden. I'm really excited about this, probably talking a little bit too much about it with the people in my life right now. Like, come look at the another inch grew here.
Mhm.
But I'm excited to see the dahlias and zinnias growing and see that we haven't gotten to flowers yet. So I'm excited to see those buds coming and what will be coming in through the summer here in the Northern Hemisphere. So that's
That's
what's changing
awesome.
my life right now. Brian, what about you?
Well, I'm a little more north than both of you guys are, and so my garden's a little behind,
Yeah.
but it's still that process of waiting and preparing, and that's really good. So,
Mm,
and I'm actually in a season in my life where I am waiting for some things to be made a little more clear.
mm,
So, this is impacting my planning. It's impacting what I think about. So I am listening to God, and I'm having conversations with Him in some new ways.
mm,
It's amazing how much I like to be in control of my world,
mm.
and God's helping me to lay that down right now. and to trust him, to trust his goodness, even for some things that I'm not able to plan or not able to manage in just the week that I'm in right now. And so he's doing good things in my heart. And I'm also seeing things where there's more room to grow. And I'm really, really thankful for that. So yeah, that's changing my life these days.
Yeah. Those waiting seasons are such an opportunity to wrestle with things, and yet it's hard to do that. So I really appreciate how you're sharing that you're leaning into what the Lord wants to be doing in your life in this waiting, and also trusting that he has good things and that
Mm-hmm.
we don't know what that looks like, but we can trust who he is and that he will continue to lead and guide. So,
Amen.
yeah, that brings us back right to how we started, that we are, as leaders, are followers. And I love how you're
Yes.
following him in the waiting season. So thanks
Mhm.
for sharing
Thank you.
that. Wow, that brings us to the end of another season of spiritual development episodes. Brian, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast again for season 4. And I guess we're gonna put you on the spot here. Will you come back to season 5?
Oh, I would love to. Yeah.
Yes,
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Kian. It's
great.
just a delight to be able to do this and to grow together with you guys as we just follow Jesus together and
That's great.
watch him transform our lives. It's awesome. I'd love to be back.
All right, we look forward to that then.
This is also a big episode for another reason. This wasn't just Brian's last episode with us for this season, but it's also the episode where we share the final word in our mystery phrase. If you've been following along with us for all of season 4, you know that we've been sharing a mystery word each week. And this week, you get the final word.
Hopefully, you've been keeping track of those words along the way. And once you put them all together, there isn't any unscrambling required. They're all in the right order. But the words might need a little help with some punctuation to make sense. So see if you can figure that out. Once you have that, send us an email at podcast@teachbeyond.org with your answer. We're not saying that the first one in wins. You have a whole week from the release of this episode, so all the way until Friday, June 7, to submit your answers. And we'll be drawing one winner from the correct answers 1 week from today, on the day that season 4 finale episode releases. We will email the winner that day.
I am very excited. I've been waiting for this day all year, and I cannot wait to
Yes.
see all of the submissions.
So much anticipation.
Exactly. And if you're listening to this episode more than a week after it released, we are very sorry, but you did miss your chance.
Can't wait to see what you all come up with and who our winner will be. Well, Keane, Brian, and I all serve with an organization called Teach Beyond. As followers of Jesus, Teach Beyond is a global community providing transformational education services as part of God's ongoing mission to transform individuals and communities into all he intends.
Want to learn more and get involved? Visit teachbeyond.org or follow us on social media. To help more people find the podcast and hear about Teach Beyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share the show with a friend. Be sure you're subscribed or following the show on the platform where you listen so you never miss an episode.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. We'll see you next week for the finale.
The mystery word for this week and the final word is way.